All right, now that you know that the recording is in progress, I am going to share the screen. And this is the screen I'm going to share. And why is it not sharing? This is where I call out for ICO.
It's shared, something's on.
Can you see an ominous murder in Moscow?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm not seeing it. That's interesting. Okay. So, as I said earlier, we spent a number of sessions on the Ukraine back in February, and I just wanted to do an update because it involves the daughter of Alexander Dugin that I had talked about. And he's been an advocate about, he's a fierce Russian nationalist about taking the Ukraine back into Mother Russia. And his daughter got assassinated, a car bomb. And Russia, of course, is blaming the Ukraine. I'll just say that the connection between Dugin and Putin isn't direct. It's a little bit unclear. Dugin doesn't hold an official post, but this is what Timothy Snyder said about him. He's a living fascist, and he's really influenced Putin's thinking. And we gave examples of how vicious he has been in his propaganda. And Putin has quoted him, and he's quoted the Bible celebrating Russian deaths. His daughter is of a similar mind. She claimed that the mass graves in Bucha were staged. So she's been put on a sanctions list that is basically a propagandist. And so going a little bit deeper into Timothy Snyder's essay that came out at Easter, we spent a little bit of time, but just reviewing that, one of Putin's heroes is a fellow from the last century. And he's claiming that the world is broken and only a Russian totalitarianism can save it. And of course, he claims that Ukraine doesn't exist, and Putin has relied on him. Anyway, just a quick few-minute update in continuity with some of our previous topics. All right, so the next slide, I'm just going to review for a minute or two what David laid out for us the last few sessions. And one abbreviation that keeps coming up is KYA, the number of thousands of years ago, basically. So 1 KYA is 1,000 years ago. So 400 KYA is 400,000. And that puts us on this time frame right here, which is in millions of years ago. And David thinks in terms of millions of years. And he sees the world, I came to realize, a little bit differently than we do, especially when it comes to global warming. But the Pleistocene, at the end of it is when humans come. And so now we're back in the realm of where we can deal with a number of years. So 20,000 years ago, or 20 KYA, it is when the world started very slowly to heat up, and the global average temperature started rising. This is the same time frame shows the end of the Pleistocene, really, and what we're going into is the Holocene, and in between are these fluctuations. So I think the thing that impressed on me from David was how much the world has varied over time, and even we'll see into the last 1,000 years. There's been dramatic variation that's changed environment. And this is all based on these core drillings in Greenland. This is just another slide that summarizes all that. And here we're looking at 13,000 years ago, and looking at the breakup of the Holocene and the Pleistocene. We can ignore all these other bits of data, but it's interesting from the standpoint when you get to archaeological sites that this is what David is, of course, most interested in. The maximum extent of the glacial ice, it was during the Pleistocene era. And when we start talking about migrations across from Siberia, we tend to think, well, when did humans come across? But David made some very interesting points about other animals that came across. I think he really got my attention when he showed how the canine species, the wolves, came across much earlier, and mammoths as well. And here's the canine pathway during one period where there was a break in the ice melt. And that was 400,000 years ago, 40 KYA, if you will. And that's when humans were just becoming humanoid. And here we are 400,000 years later, and have we made progress? I'm not sure. So the wolves came through that way, and now we finally, this is where David really, the rubber hit the road, humans coming through. But what's interesting is that it all depends whether humans developed the boat technology sufficient to navigate along the coast. And if they did, they came earlier than if they had to wait for the ice bridge to melt. And the coastal migration hypothesis is what's the dominant one now. And this shows some of the more recent evidence following ancient coastline. And then how did they do that? Well, there's a string of kelp beds. Of course, kelp, right as we speak, is being threatened all along the coast because of pollution. And it's a great threat to our fishing industry, especially out of the Bay Area. So, but this is one theory. The other theory, of course, is the arrival of arrowheads and Clovis cultures. And this is rejected. The consensus is that humans came from to California from Siberia, not overland from the east with their Clovis arrowheads. They did come, but after the coastal settlements were established. And the evidence is pretty clear. The Paleo-Coastal fishing only slowly gave way to inland hunter-gatherers with their sharp Clovis points. And why did the Clovis people came? The theory is that they were fleeing some kind of disaster in the Great Basin. And the evidence is that people populated all of California over the next 10,000 years in staggered, inconsistent, non-geographically uniform ways. As we get towards the end of today, 5,000 years ago, the fishing gave way to the milling stone and acorns, and that's where we're going. But pre-Clovis, so the original settlers that came by boat from Siberia, they got as far down as the tip of South America. Monteverde is a big find there. And even Monteverde, all the way down there, predates Clovis people getting to California. So very, very strong evidence. The most studied part of the early settlements in California are the Channel Islands off of Santa Barbara. And remember, the sea level was lower, 300 feet lower, somewhere 200, 300 feet lower. And a lot of those settlements are now underwater. The other reason that they are the most studied is that as the water level rose, it cut off access of the land to things like rats and varmints that root around in the soil and disturb archaeological finds. And that's, I was surprised to learn, that's one of the reasons that the Channel Islands have been such a great yield. And we're talking about settlements 12,000 years ago. The numbers are associated with specific dig sites where they've really found a lot of interesting stuff. And to find that, they have to drill down. Daisy Cave being one of the prime sites. And these coastal cultures, what became of them? They became the Chumash speakers. And Chumash it's going to be interesting when we get to it, the Chumash words that survive today, place names. It's very interesting. So here's how complicated it is, and you're looking at the different geological deposits that David pointed out to Brian and me on our hikes out in the open space, just looking at the side of Shell Ridge. You can see all the layering, which I never noticed before. So the Clovis people, though, finally did come, but this is after the coastal settlements, after all the settlements we've seen on the Channel Islands, and they came down through a break. The Clovis Point is named after Clovis, New Mexico. So the word Clovis, of course, didn't come until Mexico, New Mexico was settled. But that's where they found the first points, not that far from the Great Basin. And this is the sequence of the Clovis sites. You notice that the sites in California are high numbers, so they were found relatively late, and certainly after the coastal settlements had been explored. And this is the years in which Clovis points were were found. But notice what's missing on this list is California. All of the sites were discovered earlier. So there were people with Clovis points living to the east of California, but not in California before the coast was settled. So once again, California is an outlier, and that's basically a theme in the history of California all along the way. Just a minor point: the extinction of the mega fauna, the large mammals, they were driven to extinction. Why? Because they had evolved separate from human beings. And when human beings walked into this new world, the megafauna didn't recognize what killers they were. And they just, I remember the one book when we were younger was Killer Apes. And they didn't realize they were dealing with killer apes. And they got, the one theory is that they were extinguished by us, the killer apes. That's been disputed. Some people say the megafauna died out because of climate change. So nothing is settled. So Clovis sites are still being investigated. This one is near Clear Lake, which I found interesting. But this brings us now, right after the Clovis people make their appearance, we have evidence in good old Contra Costa County of human beings being here on a regular basis. And the best preserved place is Vasco Caves. And this is where David left off last time, and where we're going to take up today. So a few words about Vasco. This is from their brochure. Spectacular rock outcroppings blasted by gales, vernal pools. These are pools that are barely seasonable, that in the hot periods like now, there's just settled moisture in the bottom of these pools associated with the Mediterranean climate that we're in. There is natural springs there, however, and if we discovered a natural spring, we didn't discover it. We walked onto it. It had been piped by Mount Diablo Park. It's Moses Rock. It's right on the walk up to the top after you get up the Burma Hill there, and the Burma Trail. Anyway, interesting wildlife out there. The Vasco Caves have some cave art. I'll show you images of birds. There is evidence of the mortar holes where they pounded acorns. It was a lonely village for 1,000 years. And there's thought that this was, because of the distinct caves, a place that was a meeting place, a crossroads, if you will, for both coastal and Central Valley Native Americans who came to trade. This is looking out from the Vasco Caves, and there you see windmills, which are the villain in this story, because they've got the birds. The birds were noted out there. I guess the winds out there, and it's not that far from the Great Flyway, and there are images of birds. But this is where the villain comes in. The windmills, that although they serve 1 million Bay Area residents, there's 5,000 of them, and their whirring around has clubbed to death 165 golden eagles to start with. There is a plan afoot to replace them with larger windmills because they would have slower moving blades. Instead of moving at 100 miles an hour, maybe they'd move slower and maybe more birds would be saved. Yeah, so the pictographs from at least 8,000 years ago, used by many different people. But here's a metaphor I liked on one of the stories I covered. The Vasco caves have been disputed who has jurisdiction. And there are many different agencies that are wrangling. But the metaphor here was that presumably the caves were used by all these desperate different Indian tribes to celebrate what they had in common, and we have modern agencies arguing over the Vasco caves and who has governance. So as I said, the tribes gathered for trading, and within some of the deeper caves, probably sacred spaces for spiritual leaders, special prayers, fasts, and rituals. So maybe worth a tour. You go out there. There's you have to make an appointment. A naturalist meets you, takes you on a 4-hour 2-mile hike, and lays all this out for you. Here's one vernal pool. The grass is green there, so indicating springtime, but the tours won't start up again until the end of fire season. Whenever that's going to be this year, who knows? All right, so that takes us to 8,000 years ago, and now we have in addition to the Paleo-Coastal Culture and the Clovis, we have some immigration from the south, the Hokan speakers. And are they being attracted in this new Holocene to a new warmer environment where oak forests and pines can grow with their acorns and the pine nuts? We don't know why they came, but they came. And so you look at the distribution of Hokan speakers now, and this purple. So of course you have it at the very bottom, but it's distributed even along the north coast, and eventually the Mediterranean climate is going to attract another group, the Penutian speakers, and that's in green. And the Penutians are basically what the Miwoks and the Ohlone are. You can see the green covers all around us pretty well. Now, these are just 6 major classifications. There are over 100 languages, and even languages within the same major grouping can be mutually unintelligible to other people in that group. The other thing, of course, that came with the Mediterranean climate, in addition to the new immigrants, was seasonal fires. And we live with that yet today, but it's not a new phenomenon at all. Lightning can do it. It doesn't have to be falling towers. Okay, now the end of the Holocene, around 5,000 years ago, you get some cooling, and that was enough of a climate change to have grasslands replace sage scrub, but all through it, our oak trees continued to yield acorns. And what a boon. Within 3 days, a family, all the men and women and children working together, could harvest enough acorns to feed the family for an entire year. What a bounty. But it wasn't easy. You just didn't pick up an acorn and eat it. To make the soup and the mush, you had to first pound it with a stone, and the way of pounding changed from flat grinding rocks to that worked mostly with horizontal scrubbing to vertical pounding with a pestle, and that's what created the holes in the rock that we can see all around us. Was you pick a depression and you pound it long enough over 100 years. Now you've got holes in your rock. And where did all those rock go? They went basically into the diet of humans. And we've learned that one reason they didn't have problem with wisdom teeth was their teeth over thousands of years were smaller because their diet contained so much little bits of rock. And it was only when we learned how to use a millstone and water power to grind and producing flour that didn't have little bits of rock from direct impact. It was only when that happened 200 years ago that our teeth got bigger and there wasn't enough room. That's one colorful explanation for wisdom teeth. Very time consuming though. Here is example of the kind of powder you get with the pounding. Example of the rocks. Acorns are ideal because they can be stored and they're preserved over time, as the squirrels know. And so the Grinding Rock State Park up near Jackson is supposed to be a very nice place to visit the history of this. And David is touting it as a World Heritage Site. He thinks it's so important to the Penutian culture and the history of California Native Americans that the world should know about it. So in addition to Vasco Caves, let's add that to our possible field trip. This just demonstrates the change from a grinding horizontal type of force to a pounding pestle, mortar and pestle action, as shown by that. Now, this is a more general problem, and it's also a problem that the Mayans had to deal with their easier to process corn, but it's the same problem. There's a pericap around the outer layer of corn that has to be boiled away, but in acorns, it's more of a problem because there are toxins, actual toxins that can harm you in the pericap. But the germ is what you want to get to. That's the nutritious part. is it intended for the next generation of corn, but we hijack it for our own nutrition. This process of detoxification has a long, complicated name. We won't spend too much time on the chemical reaction, but the basic thing, you've got to get rid of the toxins, and with acorns, you've got to get rid of tannic acid, which is bitter and unpalatable. Horses that eat too much acorns raw die. Farmers know this. And the acorn, though, if you know how to process it, is highly praised as a supporter of civilization. Here's one quote that I ran across in praise of acorns. But a lot of work. So to get the caloric value that's in the fat content of the germ and the inside, you got to soak it, process it, and here's the conveyor belt, if you will, for processing acorns. One point was made that these women used their multitask while they were processing the acorns. They sang and told stories. So it was not much different than women working together today. So fire, intentional. Slash and burn. We encountered this when we were looking at Mexican, the history of Mexican and Mayans in Central America. But for acorns specifically, it was valuable because it killed the critters that feed on the acorn tree, the weevils and the moths. The fire also takes dead leaves and renders them into ground cover, and that replenishes the soil and puts the nutrients back in the soil. In addition, it clears the ground so you can see acorns better. The important point is that oak trees themselves can tolerate light, low intensity fires, and other competing type trees will burn and suffer, and the oaks profit from that by being more tolerant of fire. Also, young oaks may fall victim, but they may result in more ideal spacing of the oak trees, so that there's more efficient use of the nutrients, creating one author called oak savannas, which is pretty close to what we witnessed here. I certainly existed before they started cattle grazing. So the whole notion of good fire, this is how you can understand good fire, the way that the Native Americans in this area that survived off acorns understood it. But pyrodiversity is a term I ran across, and it's not only good for oak trees and acorns, but it's also good for other seeds and fruit trees, and in general killing bugs that may get into fruit. make some of the same points that you do with oak trees. But if you clear out the canopy, it's easier for humans to hunt. In particular, it smokes out ground squirrels, which we have a problem with in our immediate neighborhood. And if you're hunting for big game, and you've got a big hunt, cooperative hunt, it channels large animals into corridors for hunting. You can do your burn off strategically to get staggered stages of growth in your different soil to maximize diversity. It takes a while for land to recover from fire. And so if you rotate where the fires are, then you have different swatches of land recovering at different rates that enhances your diversity. The bonus is roasted grasshoppers, a real delicacy. There is a caution though about, and we've certainly experienced the problem with the Santa Ana wind when we had that big Oakland fire. But there's also something called the Diablo wind, which it was enough of a phenomenon one year that the newspaper ran a feature story on it. And the way it happens is high pressure builds in the Great Basin from heat. There's a jet stream that picks up the hot winds and blows them over the Sierras, and as they come down, they warm and dry even more, hit the heat of the Central Valley, come over the coastal range, and cause fires. One power line can ruin your day, as we've recognized. There's a lot of controversy about the let it burn policy, back and forth between conservationists and politicians. All right, so that's the oak tree, and about the same time with the cooling, there was another surge in maritime hunting, if you will. And I found this interesting, a technology development of fish hooks among American Indians, Native Americans. And also finally the working of fashioning of arrowheads. All right, so the Penutian speakers, they come into the Central Valley around 4,000 years ago. And in particular, there's a culture called the Windmiller culture. These Penutians may have also been fleeing the occasional climate catastrophes from the Great Basin. So this is the Windmiller culture is going to affect what we see right around here. Ever since the 1900s, when the early sites were discovered. And some of the most beautiful artifacts have been found in the Windmiller digs. One in particular is Marsh Creek site, and it's really interesting. So it's just south of Brentwood on the eastern side of Mount Diablo. This is how you can get there per Google Maps, the Marsh Creek State Historic Park. It says in its description, it's got archaeological sites. So I think this is the one that's being described. And what they found is graves and the distinct way that people buried their dead. So the coastal people buried their dead in a flexed position, but valley people buried their dead in extended position in general, with the head pointed west. Penutian speakers that came in, they have a distinct DNA that separates them from the coastal Native Americans. And so this distinction between the way we're buried, they look to these 500 burial sites to try to see what the explanation was between the mixed and the flexed, because they found both in this site. And the result was they found the DNA to be the similar. But here's two examples showing the difference. But the DNA from these bones showed really no difference.
Those two were found in the same place?
They
flexed and extended?
that I don't know. That I can't remember that. Also, one interesting thing is there were a number of graves that had two skulls, one corpse, one body, but two skulls. And that was very puzzling. At this particular site, that was first discovered in 2002, but it took them another 9 years to work it up, do all the radiocarbon dating, and what they found was that the so much information. David tells us all the stuff they can figure out. It's amazing, but they can tell from their diets with the carbon dating and strontium studies what they ate. One thing at the grave sites is that the amount of material that people are buried with were pretty much the same, reflecting egalitarian social structures. It's not like the Egyptians where the pharaoh gets a pyramid. And that was true until we get to the in-migration of the Athabascans, which is looming on the horizon. This egalitarian paradise, if you will, is not going to last. There's not a happy end to this story. So the extra skulls, they accumulated 7 graves of skeletons that were missing heads, but 8 where they had an extra head. I can't explain the difference between 7 and 8. The first thought is, geez, what could it have been a result of violence? No, it's inconsistent with warfare, because the strontium analysis of the bones showed that all these people had grown up together and ate the same diet. And the conclusion was they all lived along Marsh Creek. So there weren't people from way outside coming in as aggressors. So one theory is that they were just honoring ancestors and reuniting families. So if one woman moved out and left her family, maybe this was a way in death of reuniting families in some way. Some of the extra skulls have been turned into skull caps, and some with extra ornamentation, and some may have been used as ceremonial bowls, in fact. They also have found flutes and whistles that have been made from human bone. Who knows what the significance of that. So there's a period, though, of cooling, and it slowed the rising of the sea level, and maybe even a slight reversal. And as the waters receded from the high point to a cooler point, it left estuaries, which were ideal for seafood cultures. And there was an increase in archaeological sites 3,000 to 5,000 years ago in the Berkeley Pattern Culture, where they found more pestles and more aquatic food. Now, this is a slide that I hope I can make work. This is actually animation. And so what you're going to see this is 18,000 years ago, you're going to see the effect of warming. And some of you who were here saw this slide. I stole it from David. You're going to see the effects of warming as the water levels rise. So this is where the coastline was 18,000 years ago. The Farallones were on the coastline. They were not separated. But now you're going to we're going to fill the bathtub, and the water level is going to rise. But at the very end, once we get to 2,000 years ago, it's going to recede. So we'll watch it a couple of times and watch what happens to the delta over here is really going to fill up. Right now, the bay is just a big river valley, right? Okay, here we go. Filling up, filling up, filling up the Golden Gate, filling the bay, flooding the delta, receding. So I'll show that one more time, because I just find it so interesting. So that 2,000 years ago, it reached a peak flooding and receded. So there was an inland lake there. So somewhere around 3,000, there was an inland lake, and then it receded. So I just find that very interesting. The story I'm going to show you evidence of the success with the shell mounds, but this is from Rawls, my go-to book on California history, and he praises the California Native Americans, that in terms of the population density, the number of people that could be supported, it was the most concentrated population in North America, right? This doesn't include Central America at all. This is just North America. They didn't domesticate plants, but they learned to prune and weed and cull to the same effect, amplifying diversity, and an example of a successful adaptation for thousands of years. This is not John Muir's experience of American Native Americans. He arrived in the 1860s, way after the effect of the Spanish mission culture. And he found them, of course, remote from their traditions, and all this successful adaptation broken. So he had very bad things to say about Native Americans. There are 425 shell mounds in the Bay Area. This is one from Mill Valley, taken, I don't know, 100 years ago, before so much development in the Bay Area. Here they are plotted out. This is perhaps the most interesting one. This is from the Emeryville shell mound, and there was a merry-go-round on top of it, an amusement park, and you could take a mass transit to the amusement park. This is after the excavation and the building of the Emeryville Shopping Center. They could only build it, and this is a long story, I won't tell it today, but the Native Americans negotiated that you can build a shopping center here, but you have to have a memorial to Native Americans, because there were graves inside that shell mound. I'm hearing somebody. Do you want to say something?
Up to you.
Okay, so it wasn't the shopping center, though, that caused the original one to be taken down. It was to make way for Sherman-Williams Paint Factory in 1924, which was still there when Iko and I first met in Berkeley in 1964, Sherman-Williams. You could see the pigment pollution flowing from the site out into the bay from airplanes. And the biggest one, 3 stories high. All right, so that's the shell mound culture. Just finishing up here, there are other migrants that come in, the Uto-Aztecan in red, and they are among the first that the Spaniards coming north from Mexico City have to encounter. And the early encounters did not go well, as we'll learn, but it's the Uto-Aztecan tribes that offer the most resistance. Just to get back to the Channel Islands, let's not forget them. Late in this period, they developed a new technology, the Tomal. And these were boats that were made out of redwood. There were no redwood trees. So the theory is that it was drift redwood that came down the California current that was fashioned into boats using local tar seepage. And we know, I know from bathing and body surfing in San Diego, that at the end of the day, you could come home with tar on the bottom of your feet. Now, some of that from drilling, possibly, probably, but there's plenty of tar seepage. I think if you go to the Berea museum, where the woolly mammoths got caught in tar, is another evidence of that. So it doesn't have to be pollution, but it certainly wasn't to the Chumash. Reenactment today. And this is these plank boats meant that they could go further out into the ocean and catch bigger fish, handle bigger fish. It gave them wealth, increased trade, specialized craft, but alas, also more social stratification. It took 500 human days to build a tomol. So the owner of a tomol was not going to be an average guy. So there was more social stratification with technology. And then the debate, some people think, well, wait a minute, the word for canoe in Polynesian is very similar to tomol. Besides, isn't there evidence of Polynesian chicken DNA in South America? The debate rages on, apparently, but I think the consensus is no, these were homegrown, not imports from Polynesia. So here is the Chumash language. Look at these names. Familiar names, right? Malibu. We have someone in our audience who has relatives living in a Chumash named community, Malibu. Rudy. My sister lives quite near Simi Valley. There you are, Pismo Beach. Colorful names. Finally, the Athabascans are the last group. The Navajos are Athabascans. They arrived in New Mexico 500 years ago, Arizona, where Iko and I were on the reservation, and encountered the Hopi, who were sedentary agriculturalists. And it's always bad when the pastoralists and the agriculturalists clash. It's like in the musical Oklahoma. Why can't the farmers and the cowboys get along? It's a story as old as the Bible, right, Brian? So Athabascans come in, and they're attracted to the salmon along the Klamath River. And they apparently bring with them bow and arrow. Bow and arrow were unknown until relatively late. And out goes the egalitarian tradition. Now it's the guy that shoots the best with a bow and arrow is going to have the most power. And there's evidence of increased warfare. There's no more open land as of 1500 years ago. So now territory is scarce. Then along comes the Medieval Climatic Anomaly, MCA. And it's mostly thought of as a long dry spell because there were epic droughts. And it was mostly warmer, but there were wild fluctuations within that, and it was worldwide. So did it have a part in the fall of the Mayans? Did it affect the Vikings up north and push them south? It did coincide with the tomol expansion among the Chumash, the bow and arrow technology, and the violence apparently reached its peak between 1200 and 1400. Then in addition to the warfare, you saw more evidence of disease and social stratification. Hereditary elite on the Channel Islands cornered the shell bead currency. Go figure. Not sure how that played out. And trade with the inland collapse. So certainly you can see from the artifacts left behind the mixing stopped. We were surprised when we visited a site in Arizona to find shells that resulted from the trade that went all the way from northern Arizona all the way to the Chumash coast. Things that did come from the inland, like pottery and obsidian, disappeared on the Channel Islands. there was signs of starvation. The deer didn't survive, so a big source of protein was gone. Interestingly, the Bay Area did a little bit better in the MCA. If you take the evidence of the Canyon Oaks dig near Pleasanton, they survived because they had more plentiful acorns. So there was less violence during the drought years. The burial sites did not show signs of violence or poor health. One study that came out of that, I guess using strontium analysis, showed that the men in Canyon Oaks got more protein than the women. And the theory is that they were Delta fishermen. And as fishermen, they got more in the way of protein. So just to summarize, diversity is the name of the game in California, much different than the rest of North America. And some of this is from distinct climatic zones, right? So there's over 6 major language groups, but 100 mutually unintelligible languages. There's 5,000 plants and over 500 food sources. And it's all mostly because of the diverse zones we have. Mediterranean, semi-arid, desert, alpine, a nice mix. And of the 500 food sources, I want to point out that the California Native Americans also have 3 sisters. We learned when we were doing the Mayan culture, their 3 sisters were corn, beans, and squash. The corn provided the stalks for the beans to climb, and the squash leaves provided the ground cover. Symbiotic. But there was a symbiosis between, in California, between nuts, like acorns, seeds, and roots. So you dig for the roots, that aerates the soil, making it more hospitable for seeds and acorns. The trees shade the seeds are the powerhouse for the roots. And finally, the master of weaving were the California basket weavers. And you can go to this website. The state government has a website that just features all of these marvelous baskets. So that's where I'm going to stop. If I can get this back on my screen. I can see it here. So I'm going to stop share. And lo and behold, that worked. Okay. So who have we, but you can't see it there. All right, so we're open for questions and comments, either from Brian or Rudy, Nico sitting here, or for Carolyn, Connie, Linda, or Rob.
Comment, and that is drought and scarcity. It's logical that it would lead to violence.
Yeah, and it was the opposite.
Is it the case that violence between tribes is always driven by scarcity? Or maybe you noticed something I didn't.
I thought it said that you said that drought led to less violence
No more.
or more violence.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Shortage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would think that.
there was a section in there where a certain valley or area had more acorn production due to the wetness cycles and moisture. But is there evidence that life is always connected with scarcity, or
I don't know about always. I think the shortage, you get the tendency to competition, but it certainly doesn't have to be. And I think there are ethical systems that work that out. And that's what we don't know is what ethical systems did they live under. You're familiar with all the ethical systems that are around us today, and we can imagine some would survive shortage better than others. But we don't know what they had. We know that there was a change when there was social stratification because of technology, like the Tomel boats requiring 500 man hours. Well, whoever controlled those boats had a lot of power. We know new technology like the bow and arrow changed things.
is that because you could kill the larger with the bow, so you could store more food, you could store and sell more food?
Well, I think the problem with the bow and arrow was it came in roughly at the same time that the land was getting full. And so once the land becomes scarce, a shortage of land, then you have territoriality, you have ownership. Before then, if there's a problem, you just move on, right? But when that moving on is not an option, then violence becomes more of an option. I don't know how I process it.
When did the Athabascans move into the migration? Because I remember the pattern. They were in inland. They didn't go on the coast or anything, right? The Athabascans.
Well, they came. Yeah, I think they came along the Klamath, so they were inland, but they followed.
Then and then they went.
Apparently, they followed the salmon along the Klamath, and I think they arrived in Arizona where we were 500 years ago. I think they were there 1,000 years ago. I think I'd have to go back and look at the maps.
They were kind of a aggressive group, huh? Compared to the ones that came first.
Yeah, my knowledge on this is wide and shallow, but not deep. But I haven't read multiple sources, but one source did say that was the case. But I wouldn't be willing to argue that. But we certainly know in northern Arizona that they raided the Hopis.
Yeah.
And that was, huh? Well, they all came from Siberia. So I really went down a rabbit hole looking for language, trying to follow language, and specifically the Altaic languages of, well, Japan, for instance, and Siberia. But it turns out that there is no language connections that last beyond 5,000 years. Everything gets blurred and erased and rebooted. So there was no, at least linguistically, Athabascan connection to existent languages in Siberia. What would be interesting is the DNA. And I'm sure there'll be some conclusions from that. But I was interested in the language because it was unintelligible to the Japanese, who were probably genetically similar. Well, but that island was relatively late. I mean, if you look at the rise of sea level, I mean, who knows? I'd have to go back and study that. But you know, Jared Diamond surely makes the point that the Japanese are totally connected to the Koreans. In fact, are an offshoot of Koreans who were on the mainland, linguistically and pottery wise. Okay.
Well done.
All right. If there are no other questions, I'll try to figure out how to stop taping. Oh, next week, Connie. What do you think?
Well,
Anyway, we'll talk more.
yes.
Okay. Because Connie is our knows more about Miwok folkways than anybody. So if she's got the time, she's pretty busy these days. If she's got the time, she maybe will share some of those folkways. Oh, Carolyn, I forgot. I stopped one short of your picture. So Karen, I don't know how I can get back because I've lost control of my toolbar. I'll start Connie's lecture. I'm going to help Connie prepare a talk on a PowerPoint, and I'll put Carolyn your photo of the plaque outside the Danville Library about the Miwoks. Aiko's looking at it now. She can verify I stopped one short. So, all right. Thank you all. I'll probably labor on here trying to figure out how to stop the taping. I haven't stopped it yet. So I can't see the toolbar. What happened to it?
Wait, just a minute. Okay. Well, here it is.
How did you do that?
Increase the size of this, and then you stop the taping.
Thank you. Okay, goodbye, everybody.